Good evening. Today is April 5th, 2021, and this is the 46th episode of New Paradigms. I am your host, Sargis Sangari. My guest today is a good friend of mine again, Jason Morgan. Jason is coming to us from Japan. He is an associate professor at Reitaku University in Japan. His latest books are Law and Society, the Imperial Japan, and also the Search for Equity, which has been carried by Cambria in 2020, and also Information Regimes in East Asia during the Cold War. Jason has also written several books, chapters, as well as several books in Japanese. He translated Professor Hata's groundbreaking book on comfort women and sex in the battle zone, which was released by Hamilton Books in 2018. I have to tell you, Jason, I'm glad that we had an opportunity to bring you here. Last time that we worked together, collaborated, really was on trying to get that article that I had written on COVID a year ago. Tomorrow will be the anniversary for it. And Japan Forward, we could not get it printed here in the United States. We had an opportunity to finally get it in Japan Forward. Thank you for all the hard work you did. I know we talk on a daily basis, and China is always the big elephant or dragon, in this case, in the room that we always talk about. I'm glad we have you here, and hopefully we can talk about a little bit as to what Japan is dealing with when it comes to China, the information operations, and also other type of IOs, influence operations that affect our daily basis. It's good to have you here, Jason.
Thank you so much, Sargis. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm honored to be here, and I'm very grateful too. I know it's not easy to coordinate. I think we're 14 hours apart, so I'm actually patching in from the future here. It's April 6th out here in Japan, so ask me a question about what happened in the past 14 hours. I'll let you know. I'm thrilled to be here. Yeah, and I learn so much from you every day, Sargis. I mean, we're always talking, like you said, on email, probably pretty much every day. So learned a lot from you about what's going on in the United States and in the Middle East, and also China. China is always on the radar screen.
No, look, I was there in 2015. I was there with Al, who was supposed to be here with us today, Al Johnson, who wasn't able to make it today. These things happen when we plan these shows. And also Michael Yon, who was in Japan at the time. We were at a security brief and also a anti-terrorism conference where we were both looking at everything that encompasses what's happening globally at that time. And I know that he did talk about the comfort movement, which we are going to talk about later in our discussion. But I think the biggest piece for me is as far as the information operations and influence operations by China. I know, we couldn't get I had written the piece on the Wuhan virus in February of 2020. And, when I was in Korea in 2019, December 7th, when I was there, we knew something was coming out of China, but we didn't know what it was. And when I came back, I wrote the article, tried to get it published here initially with our newspapers in the U.S., and went through almost 9 rewrites on it, and we couldn't get it published. And I know even between me and you, how many times did I have to go through editing? And then after it was published, even the follow-up articles, we were getting pushback on it because China doesn't like it when you go against their info ops. But I do want to have you kind of talk a little bit about that to open it up as far as what we were able to do with that Wuhan article, and then we'll move on talking a little bit more about what's happening with Chinese information operations and influence operations in U.S. and Japan.
Yeah, sure. The article is fantastic, Sargis. I was thrilled to see it up. It's groundbreaking, actually. The picture we're looking at now, it's got some circles on a PowerPoint presentation, and you can see there the date is November 26, 2015, and a researcher is giving a talk. The yellow lettering there, it says in Chinese very clearly, novel coronavirus. And it's at the Wuhan lab. This is not a conspiracy theory. the Wuhan lab. There are people at the Wuhan lab who are working on novel coronaviruses, and it's not far-fetched. In fact, it makes the most sense if you take all the evidence together to say that this virus that is now trammeling the world's economy and has led to millions of hospitalizations and deaths around the world is probably a weapon, or at least was probably part of some very malign research that was being done in the People's Republic of China, and then it was covered up by the Chinese Communist Party. So the parallels that you brought out in the article with the Sverdlovsk incident in the Soviet Union are really chilling, actually. As you point out in the article, there was an incident in the Soviet Union where a bioweapons lab had accidentally released some anthrax into the general population. And, anthrax is a horrible bioweapon. And the first reaction was to blame the people that were getting sick, to blame the local people, just like what happened in Wuhan. The initial narrative was the wet market, the bats, if you remember. People were selling these pangolins or these animals from the wet market. And so the Chinese government blamed the people who were getting sick, who had nothing to do with this. I mean, this is not, it's not like the people of Wuhan are going around infecting themselves with the virus. They were the first victims of the Chinese Communist Party. And the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. They just blamed the people who got sick and said, no, this is all your fault. This anthrax outbreak was not us. But here you go, the evidence that you found for your Japan Forward article here you've got a guy in 2015 working on the novel coronavirus at the Wuhan lab. It doesn't take much to put the pieces together here. So what we've seen, I think, in all of this, Sargis, and this is just one part of the puzzle, is that there's a blanket lies and intimidation and information ops that stifle any sort of discussion about the Chinese Communist Party, what it really is, things that it does.
No, I mean, it does, Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it does. Look.
Go ahead. I think I'm freezing up a little bit here. Sorry.
It's okay. It happens. I mean, I think as soon as you start hitting your Chinese, your service starts slowing down for whatever reason. So it's unfortunate, but there's a reality of what we have to deal with on a daily basis. Look, I mean, most of this stuff is open source. I mean, it's funny. We put this information out. A lot of the major media, as we say, Marcus, we're not carrying it. That's why I think it's important to kind of read the type of work that you put together, Jason, these small podcasts of what we do. What I put out was information. That's all. And if it was an information ops, it was to say, here is what the evidence is on open source. So I don't know why it was so difficult for people to kind of do the link analysis on this thing. But it's a reality of what we have to deal with. I'm a little bit more curious about what is the issues in Japan. How is Japan really dealing with some of these problems? I know there's things that the globe knows about, to include, Chinese actual military operations to try to extend into the waters where they can have strategic foothold against Japan itself. And Japan is already dealing with the whole Article 9 issue that it has to constantly unravel internally. But if you could tell us a little bit about that, and then maybe we could look at some of the other issues as far as information operations and what Japan is trying to do to counter some of those.
Sure. Yeah. So the biggest issue here, and I think it's because it's the most obvious, it's the most visible, is the Chinese incursion around the Senkaku Islands, which happens almost every day. The Senkaku Islands are part of Okinawa Prefecture, Ishigaki City. They're way down in the sort of the tip of the Okinawa sort of archipelago, if you want to call it that, more towards Taiwan. And they're uninhabited islands. There have been people there in the past, but since 1895, they've been incorporated into the actual territory of Japan, and they were part of the group of islands that was ceded to the United States in 1945, and then they were returned in 1972. So Japan has been in charge of the Senkakus with the exception of the post-war to 1972, since that time. And the Chinese Coast Guard, well, they call it the Coast Guard, but it's actually naval ships that are painted white and given Coast Guard markings. These are not Coast Guard ships. These are not what you think of as the Coast Guard cutters that are intercepting, drug smugglers off the coast of, Florida or something. That's not Coast Guard ships. These are gigantic ships that have been painted white. These are Navy ships, and they're being sent to the Senkakus almost every day. And the Japanese Coast Guard, the real Coast Guard, is out there trying to deal with this incursion. There's a video there, and it's a huge Coast Guard. I mean, China Coast Guard. That's the biggest Coast Guard ship I ever saw. So the Chinese actually changed the law, and I've got a copy here of the latest Seiron magazine in my hands, and the whole point of the Seiron, the first part of the Seiron issue for this month of May here is about the Coast Guard law. The Chinese have changed the Coast Guard law recently, which gives them the legal authority to repulse foreign invaders into their territory. And the Chinese say that the Senkakus are Chinese territory. It's completely false. There's no basis in fact. It's simply an assertion of political will. And the whole point of the law that was changed recently is so that the Chinese will have legal cover for their invasion of the Senkakus. Now, the way the Chinese operate in the Senkakus is really interesting because it's the same playbook for every other issue that we've faced with China, is that they just lie and change the subject. And they blanket over the historical and the political truth with a whole array of lies and innuendo and misdirection. Info war. It's classic info war. And so the Chinese will say that the Senkakus are an internal part of China. Don't interfere with Chinese internal politics, and that the Japanese were the aggressors in World War II, et cetera, et cetera. None of this has anything to do with the Senkakus. But the whole point is to change the subject and then intimidate people so that you don't even feel comfortable talking about the issue anymore. You feel afraid even to say the name Senkakus. That's how it works. We see that very clearly.
No, look, I know that their information operation is strong. But we put out a little picture where they do work with elements within the U.S. policy to influence politicians. They're very heavily invested in supporting through other means the election of individuals who are running on what we call the far left here in the U.S. who constantly are unfortunately abiding to them, and which shouldn't happen, but it's a reality. The politician becomes a slave to foreign interests, as much as U.S. tries on the surface to push back against them, it doesn't help when you have individuals within the current administration saying that we want to see even China and Iran have a healthy relationship together. Well, if they have a healthy relationship together, that means the SCO is expanding. If SCO is expanding, that means Russia's profiting in Syria, and China is able to enter the waters to take over the piece of terrain that belongs to the Japanese. You mentioned their information operations. I know that Comfort Women was also a long time ago discovered there was much more of an information operation that the Chinese were able to push against divisions that would sow divisions between Japan and the United States on the political level, even Japan and Korea, that could be the natural allies within the region to fight against China itself. I'm not sure if you have any more updates on this for us.
Yeah, the Comfort Women, there's actually been a big movement, a big change in that over the past few months. Just to briefly go back to the Mike Gonzalez piece you had up just a second ago, I really like this guy, Mike Gonzalez. I don't know him personally, but I follow his work. I love reading his articles at the Daily Signal and at Heritage Foundation. He gets it. The Chinese, you saw this in Alaska recently with Tony Blinken, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, when he was in this exchange with Yang Jiechi. It's not that Tony Blinken has been bought out by the Chinese. It's not that he's working for them, but ideologically, his mind has been colonized by Chinese propaganda. I mean, he's trying to defend the United States, and he ends up agreeing with the Chinese that yes, the United States is a terrible country, and we're horribly racist, and et cetera, et cetera. All the talking points that you hear from the American left are the same talking points that China has been exploiting for years to try to undermine the sort of the moral basis for American action around the world. And the Comfort Women is also a part of this this operation. It's mostly aimed at Japan, but it's also very much aimed at the United States. And that's something that Michael Yon has been covering for a long time. So I think he was one of the first ones outside of Japan to figure this out, that the Comfort Women issue, it's not really about what happened during World War II. The Comfort Women history is actually very well documented. I translated a book about the Comfort Women. The book is by Hata Ikuhiko. He's probably the most renowned living historian in Japan, and he's an historian of modern Japan, and he writes mainly about the military and about bureaucracy in 20th century Japan. He's written some books and book chapters about the Nomon Han incident, and he's written a whole series about the Showa, about sort of the 1920s and 30s and 40s history. So the history of the Comfort Women is actually very well documented. But what we're talking about with the Comfort Women is an info operation, and it's a collaboration between or among communists and far left operatives, including lawyers in Japan and communists in South Korea, and then also the Chinese Communist Party, and also hard left professors, which is to say every professor almost in the United States. And they don't realize, most of them don't realize that they're working for the same team, but the talking points are all the same. So there's been a huge development in this Comfort Women issue lately. Harvard law professor John Mark Ramsire wrote a short paper, actually. It's only about 8 or 9 pages, and it was published in the International Review of Law and Economics, and it was called Contracting for Sex in the Pacific War. And Ramsire lays out the history of the Comfort Women, that this is basically a contractual exercise. Even though there weren't written contracts in most cases, there were what was called credible commitments, and the comfort station system was a military brothel, and there were recruiters that were mostly Korean in the Korean Peninsula, and they brought in mostly very poor young women from farming villages or prostitutes, and they worked at these comfort stations. But what the narrative is in the United States among the far left professors is that they were sex slaves and that they were kidnapped by the Japanese military. The Japanese military is not going to send troops to its own homeland. The Korean Peninsula was part of Japan at the time, to kidnap 200,000 Koreans and send them to brothels. It's totally absurd. Sargis, you were in the military. You know that you don't get orders like that in the military. Hey, why don't you go kidnap 200,000 women? It's insane.
No, I think, look, Michael Young had looked at it, and when we looked at the amount of ships that existed in the Japanese imperial military and how they were deployed to fight against the United States at that time, when in the Pacific, just grabbing every single ship, carrier, battleship that they had, you wouldn't have enough tonnage to be able to put all the so-called Comfort Women on those ships just to transport them for to be sex slaves. Literally, they would have to pull everything out of the battlefield just to be able to even get to where they can maybe transport a small portion of the numbers that are always pushed by the professors and the under Chinese information operation. It's a bad part of history. War always leads to these things. You don't want to see anyone to have to sell themselves to be able to live or make a living. We understand that. But the narrative here today is that what is being pushed to put a divide between the Korean and the Japanese governments, communities. And, when the United States goes out and builds a comfort woman statue without understanding that it's being pushed by lobbyists that are tied to Chinese conglomerates, is not the way to move forward. And I think there has to be a... Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sargis.
No, it's okay, Jason. Go ahead. It's just I was going to say that we have to get to a point where we understand how information operations are working both in the U.S. and China, and try to counter it at the highest levels possible. Yeah,
you're exactly right. I mean, the information ops, and this is really Michael Yon's. He's got a lot of brilliant projects under his belt, but the figuring out the comfort women issue, I think, is maybe one of his best. So and Al Johnson was also a huge part of this. Al, communicating with Al over the years, and he's shown me so much about how this thing works from the inside. The comfort women operation. So you've got far left professors who are spouting this narrative, which is basically a product of the Japanese Communist Party. The person who made up the sex slave operation thing, the whole 200,000 sex slaves, a man named Yoshida Seiji, and he was a Japanese communist. And he later admitted that it was all, he made the whole thing up. There was just a case in the Japanese Supreme Court, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, in which one of the reporters for the Asahi Shimbun newspaper, a far left newspaper here, who had written about the comfort women issue, most of those articles were retracted as being fake news, and he sued the person who called him out on it, and he lost every single court case all the way up to the Supreme Court here in Japan. The man wrote fake news in the Asahi Shimbun newspaper about the comfort women issue. It was the Yoshida Seiji communist talking points. And the American professors, the hard left professors, they have been spouting this narrative for decades about the sex slaves. It's an anti-Japan, frankly quite racist against Japan and Korea operation against the Japan-US alliance, the Japan-South Korea alliance. And Mark Ramsar called them out on it. He said, this is bunk. This is fake news. There is no historical documentation that supports this narrative. It's completely false. Actually, he wrote about this in Japan Forward too. And he got attacked from every direction. I mean, you got hard left professors in Ivy League universities, people also at Harvard who are attacking him, and you got people inside of Japan attacking him, inside of Korea attacking him. You got people inside of China who are attacking him. But the historical fact is that what Ramsar wrote is the truth. And you mentioned earlier about the conglomerates, Sargis, and the people inside the U.S. working with the comfort women statue people. These are not human rights statues. These are not about protecting young women. Russell Lowe, who was the spy, Dianne Feinstein's pet spy for 20 years, when he was finally outed by the FBI, he went directly, from Feinstein's office to the Comfort Women Statue organization to bring the Comfort Women Statue to San Francisco. This is not hard to figure out. PRC spy who had his picture taken with Christine Fong, who was Swalwell's pet spy there for a few years. The Chinese Communist Party is running this comfort women operation inside the United States, and Michael Yon smoked it out. So you got the thing up there, the truth about the comfort women. This is not about history. This is about psychological information warfare inside of Japan and the United States and in Korea.
Look, Jason, I wish we had more time to discuss things. I know that you're starting classes again tomorrow. I know we're kind of behind the power curve on the hard time limit that we had, that we could keep you here. But I want to ask one last question before we kind of close out the show.
Sure.
There are limited English language outlets like Japan Forward, the one that I wrote that article for a year ago. Right. From your background, from what you're looking at, what's the current media landscape in Japan, and how has it maybe changed over the years, either pro CCP or anti CCP, when it comes to the bias, and if you could kind of, in a short period, cover and I think you kind of touched upon it as far as the university cultures in the U.S. and also in Japan. Where do you think the news and the academia come to merge, where we can have maybe some influence that would change some of the CCP propaganda and censorship, or has it changed?
Yeah, I'll put in a plug again for Japan Forward. Japan Forward is the future of media in Japan. I think that very strongly. Professor Hata, who wrote the Comfort Women book, he's been researching also sort of the way media operates in Japan. And in the post-war, this country, Japan, was not only militarily defeated, but was also psychologically defeated. There's been some research coming out lately about the War Guilt Information Program and the way that GHQ, I've got a book here by historian Nishio Kanji about the GHQ info-war ops against Japan after World War II. And basically this country was told that they alone were responsible for everything that had gone wrong in the 1930s and 40s. And I think a lot of people here kind of believed that in the post-war. And being anti-Japan became a mark of intellectual purity here in the post-war. So a lot of the people that are quoted in the United States as being representative of the Japanese intellectual milieu, Maruyama Masao, etc., these people were far left, and many of them were communists. E.H. Norman, John Dower, who's written a lot of books about Japan, a very famous guy, he cut his teeth introducing a man named E.H. Norman to the American reading public. Norman was a Canadian communist who was probably working, at least in some capacity, for the Soviet Union inside of Japan. So you got, the most famous interpreter of Japan in the United States is a fan of this Canadian communist operative. So that's been changing recently. And Japan Forward, which is part of the Sankei Shimbun, which is kind of like the Wall Street Journal of Japan, has been leading the move away from being anti-Japan and more towards being not necessarily pro-Japan, but pro-truth. We want to know what's going on in the world, and we don't want to filter it through any sort of weird bias, pro or anti, this or that. Like you said at the beginning, Sargis, we want information. We want to know what's going on. And Japan Forward, a lot of the media is dying. The newspapers are losing readership. You go on the train and people got their smartphones, but I don't see anybody reading the newspaper anymore, whereas 20 years ago, everybody had a newspaper open. And Japan Forward we're online, and we're reaching out across the world. We got readers and we got contributors from South Korea, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, we got so many people in the Philippines, Vietnam. We got a huge readership in India. We got a lot of folks coming in from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South America, all over the world, Germany. They want to know what's going on in Japan, and they don't want the usual biased fake news that you get from the CNN and the New York Times and all those affiliated outlets. That's the future of media in Japan, I think, is Japan Forward, to answer your question. And there's a lot of people who need that info. We need it. We got to have that good information about Japan. It's vital. It's vital.
Look, all that is changing here to an extent. I mean, look, if it wasn't for Japan Forward, I would have never been able to submit that article. It would have been put somewhere on the back burner, and actually everything we put in there started showing that within a month after that, we started seeing individuals within the U.S. government coming out and saying, you know what, this sounds like it's heading in the right direction. Even the current administration on the Biden administration has somewhat reached out and said, yes, it seems like that's where it originated from. Now, how's it going to change?
I think, just to interrupt you, I'm very sorry. I was thinking when you were talking about that, as we need samurai like you, Sargis. We need one man to stand out in the front and say, I ain't moving. This is the truth, and I ain't backing down. And if you got one guy like that, the troops rally, but you need a Lieutenant Colonel Sangari standing out in the front, and then people move. But you need to, first of all, you need to have a place to stand, right? I mean, you need to have a place where the samurai can go. So kudos to you, sir, for standing out in front and being ahead of the curve on that.
No, like every samurai needs their staff to help them out too. So if it wasn't for you, you'd have never made it to Japan forward. And I got to tell you, I have a feeling that the samurais in the past were much more healthier, stronger, much more capable physically than the person you're looking at today. But we'll take the pluses on it. I'll still fight. Don't worry about it.
I'll carry your sword any day.
Thank you. Much appreciated. We'll always stay in the fight. Jason, I know we got the QR set up as far as if people want to know, our listeners and viewers know that all they have to do is just basically go to the QR code with their phone and they could go directly to see what you're doing working on right now currently and what you have in the near future. I hope that we could bring you back later to do a more of a deep dive as far as the influence operations by China, both here and in Japan. And we kind of like skimmed over them to an extent for our viewers today, but we'll pick on the eaches. And hopefully, maybe we could do a follow-up on what we had written a year ago with Japan Forward. And if they want us to write and expand a little bit more on it, we could do that as part of the information operations and how the SEO will continue to move forward regardless of the administrations in the United States. I'll give you the last word, Jason. And again, I appreciate the fact that you gave us so much time, given the schedule that you have. And then you get the last word.
All right. Well, I just wanted, the last word I think I'll say is thank you. Sargis, I'm thrilled to be on, and I know that I've been very hard to get a hold of recently. As you can see, I've got a little bit of work to do, so I've been a little bit busy. But I really appreciate you having me on here, and I also appreciate your approach to the world, Sargis. You're a patriot, and you take things step by step, and you believe in America. And recently it's been not so easy to keep the faith in the United States for a lot of people, including me. Kind of seeing the country fall apart and going, what the heck's going on around here? Everybody's losing their minds. But you've been standing in the breach and saying, let's be calm here, folks, and let's sort of keep a bright vision for the future. And I think we need folks like you, Sargis. I'm so grateful that you're standing out here in front and trying to spread the good word.
No, thank you, Jason. And it's the American spirit is guys like you that are in Japan, still are representatives of the United States, really, ambassadors of our nation to the Japanese people. And so through your hard work, they see exactly what America is all about. You're the person, guys like you are the ones who are actually carrying on the American spirit. And I got to tell you, as I say to everybody, as a soldier, when everybody came to me after elections, which I was part of, and they said, everything's lost, everything's over. I'm like, as long as I'm on the battlefield, nothing's lost. When I'm dead and gone, then you know what? I can't do anything about it. But until the last breath, you fight and you fight. You continue fighting. And we will be victorious because I think that people in general want to see the best for all of us. And they don't want to see tribalism. They don't want to see this divide that others sow. And individuals like to follow positive leadership. They don't like negative leadership. They may have to because, their money is tied to them. Their future is tied to them. But as long as you stay independent, like guys like Jason and others, Al, and me, I think we're going to have a pretty good fighting chance. We'll leave the groundwork to Michael Yon as he's out there pounding the pavement. And Jason, God bless. We're going to have you back again, buddy. And I think Japan's in good hands while you're there. There's new paradigms.